Welcome to the Not Even Wine with Dinner podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Crisp, and we are here to talk about all things life, love, loss, and liquor. So let's uncork the bottle and get this party started. Hey guys, hello, my lovelies. Welcome to the next episode of Not Even Wine with Dinner. Well, I am glad to be back. If you didn't notice, I was gone for a couple of weeks. My husband and I went to England to go visit his family, and it was lovely because it was in the 30s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s there, and I came back to Guatemala where it's 92, and it's quite stuffy. So I'm already missing that cool weather, but it was a really nice trip, and I had the best of intentions of recording an episode while I was there. And then when I got there, it was like, I'm on vacation and I need a break. So I am sorry. I really did have like this big grand scheme plan to have my British podcast episode, but it didn't happen. So anyway, but here I am and I'm back. So yay. Today's episode, we are going to talk about something that I have noticed over the last, let's say, 6 to 8 months. I'm going to talk about being the sober girl at the bar. And I recently wrote about this on Medium, and I wrote about more of it being in a humorous manner. And I don't mean like, haha, drunk people are funny. I mean, obviously we can be funny when we do drink, but I wrote a little bit more of a humorous side of the observations of others, not judging because I've been there. I've been that person. However, what I realized recently was that, there's a lot to watch. There's a lot to observe, and there's a lot to observe in ourselves as sober people and people who are not drinking, or maybe you're sober curious. And I felt like that was kind of an important thing to bring up today, is just observations that I made. And I don't know, call it like a tiny little how-to list of how to navigate the bar if you're not drinking. All right, so let's get cracking. So we're going to talk about how to plan, what we see, hear, how we feel, and then how we deal with it. Now, the first question most people are going to ask is, if you're not drinking, why are you at the bar? Perfectly good question. It's usually because it's some sort of circumstantial issue, meaning there's an event that somebody's having. It could be that it's a meet and greet for a work setting. It could be a birthday party or a celebration or a going away party, whatever. It could be just, typically it's a celebration. And that's one way that you end up at the bar. Now, even on vacation recently, there was a lot of events going on, a lot of people in the family, and everyone was like, oh, let's go to the pub. And that was fine. I've done it before many times without drinking, but I just observed a few different things this time. And I really, really felt strongly about wanting to talk about this. So those are reasons that you would end up in a bar. And, before people judge, it's just that we don't have to go, but then sometimes we get judged if we don't go. So every situation is different. And let me start by saying, if you're newly sober and you are struggling, maybe you just got out of rehab, maybe you really, really had an intense addiction, then you have no business going into a bar. Don't tempt yourself. Don't tempt fate. Don't put yourself in that situation that's going to tempt you. Or it's going to be so uncomfortable that you're going to think, why did I quit? I really don't want to quit. And you're basically setting yourself up for failure. My situation is that I have done a couple different sobriety attempts. I'm on my second one now. I am in a comfortable position where I don't feel tempted by alcohol. I don't feel like I'm going to all of a sudden say, screw it, I'm just going to have a beer. I'm past that. Part of it is because Not Even Wine with Dinner is like the world is now my accountability partner. This podcast, my writing on Medium, you are all my accountability partners. So if I were to drink, oh my gosh, I basically like fuck up my brand, so to speak. So, that's a good thing for me. That is an accountability for me. But, you know, I don't feel tempted to drink. So let's put that out there. So if you're newly sober, then, don't go if you can avoid it. Secondly, you want to plan. And there's several steps that I'm talking about here. Number one is, what are you going to drink? When you get to the bar, don't do what I did recently and get caught off guard not knowing what you wanted to drink. Historically, when I go to somewhere that's people are drinking, I'll have cranberry and soda. And I did that, but for some reason this time it just didn't taste that great. And I was kind of like, ugh, yeah, do I want another one? No, I don't know. And, when you've had 3 cranberry and sodas or club sodas, all I end up is a sugar high and feeling bloated, and I need to pee a lot from the carbonation. So it doesn't serve me well at all. Same with if I'm drinking a bunch of water. So what I advise is planning ahead as to what it is that you want to drink if you're going to have anything, so that you at least have that, I don't know, call it a fixation. You've got that thing in your hand. So while everybody's standing around at a bar, or you're like standing at the high top table, whatever it is, you're not just kind of standing there with your hands in your lap or hands folded, not knowing what to do. When you're in the bar, people just feel that need to hold a drink. So prepare your drink, whether it's a non-alcoholic beer or a mocktail or a soda, water, club soda with a spritzer, whatever. Think about it ahead of time, because what you will encounter, or I should say you could potentially encounter, is the sober stare. And the sober stare is when you are either hemming and hawing about what you want to drink, and people are looking at you, and when they realize that you're trying to find a non-alcoholic drink, that opens up the floodgates of questions. Or if you're not sure what you're going to drink, people will start buying you drinks, or they'll start suggesting, hey, let me just get you an old fashioned. I'll grab you a beer. You could have a vodka tonic, whatever. And that then opens you up to have those questions that you have to feel like you're obligated to answer, which kind of goes into my next step. So before I get that, plan what you're going to drink so that you can avoid the sober stare, and you're at least prepared to just go in and say, hey, I want this. And by the way, I've always said, do you have anything non-alcoholic? I'm getting a little bit better versed at what to order. So in a good bar, meaning I don't know, let me say established, or in a bigger city, you can ask for an NA or a 0.0 or something along those lines. So you don't have to say non-alcoholic out loud, which realistically, this pisses me off that I even say that out loud in 2026. Like, I have to hide my sobriety, or I have to be shamed of my sobriety. I shouldn't, but unfortunately that still happens, I think. Going back to my childhood or my young adulthood, my teens, I think about the 80s and 90s and all that. And it was like, it was so uncool to even think about not drinking. You would be looked at like you had 3 heads. I come from an environment where, like, a weekend night out was getting someone who was of legal age to buy us a 6-pack, getting in a car and driving around drinking. How crazy is that? When I graduated from high school, Mothers Against Drunk Driving had just launched. Like, they had just started in the mid to late 80s. And prior to that, we just did it. We just got in the car and went to some parking lot, had a parking lot party, or we just like literally drove around drinking. I can remember my parents taking us for a Sunday drive, both in Texas and Connecticut, and putting a cooler in the car with snacks and a couple of beers. I think this was even before open container laws came into effect. So prior to that, you could have an open can in the car. So we have come far, but we still have some crosses to bear in the sobriety world. That's definitely for sure. Okay, so covered the sober stare. Couple more things. So think about your driving situation. Are you driving? Are you the assigned designated driver? Are you taking an Uber, a cab? What is your driving scenario? And I think it's important to solidify that before you go, because if you don't have a plan, you can get stuck. And when I start talking a little bit more about when we start getting into like drunk territory, you don't want to be stuck. So if you're driving, that's fine, you drive. If you're the designated driver, just make sure that you know that you are then committed to staying to the end, no matter how ugly that is. If you're going to Uber, that's fine. And, maybe make sure that your friends at least have something sorted out, kind of sort that out with them ahead of time so that you have an escape plan or an exit plan, however you want to word that. That way you don't get in a situation where you're just like, oh my God, get me the hell out of here, and you can't leave, or you're uncomfortable and you don't know what to do and you're stuck. And then, like I said, have the timing set in your head of like, at what point am I going to leave? Maybe it's, I'm just going to go for a couple of drinks and then I'm going to bail out. Or I'm going to, let's see, what's the way I want to put this? I'm going to stay until it gets too drunk out. That's one way to word it. I just heard that phrase and it made me laugh. Yeah, I'll hang out, but I'll hang out until it gets too drunk out. So once it gets too drunk out, that's your cue to bail. So the next thing is going to be your response. So going back to the sober stare, you should have some phrases, I guess would be the best way to put it. Some phrases in your back pocket. Like, how are you going to respond if someone says, oh, you're not drinking, or why aren't you drinking, or how come you don't drink anymore? Gauge the person, how close they are to you. Are they an acquaintance? Are they a stranger? Is it a coworker? Is it a friend? If it's a true friend, they probably already know your situation and you shouldn't have to explain. And realistically, you shouldn't have to explain yourself anyway. But if somebody starts to ask you, the one thing that I always want to start with, and if you've listened to this podcast, you probably heard it, no is a complete sentence. I have a whole episode, I think it was one of my first or second episodes of this podcast. So if you go back to the episode list, look for no is a complete sentence, and I highly recommend listening to that, because that really is your first out. You can just say, if someone says, do you want to drink? You can just say no. I'm not referring to questioning why. That's a whole different thing we're going to get to. But just if someone says, can I get you a drink, or can I get you a whatever, old fashioned, a beer, kamikaze, a buttery nipple, whatever, then you can just say no. And you shouldn't have to follow it up with no but, or no because, or no thanks. No thanks is good enough in that scenario. If you're getting questioned as to why, then I recommend gauging the person. Who is it? How close are you to that person? If it's a stranger, you can just literally look at them and be like, I just don't drink. That's it. Someone starts to push you, say, Billy, then you have to gauge your own politeness. I'm not recommending that you turn into an asshole, but sometimes that might be necessary. You can tell somebody that it's none of their business or none of their concern, or I don't mean to be offensive, or please don't take this the wrong way, but it's not really any of your concern. But I think another good answer is just like, I just don't, not really interested. You don't have to say that you drank before and you quit, or you're sober, or you're in recovery, or that's just nobody's business. Just saying, I don't drink or don't care for it, something like that is perfectly fine. If somebody that you know starts to get shitty with you, a good sarcastic answer is, you know what? I realized I was getting too much like you. That's a pretty awful thing to say, and I would obviously never say that to anybody, but it is a hardcore sarcastic retort, I guess, if you will, should you feel that. But anyway, just have a plan of a response to be able to handle how to deal with people when they ask you why you don't drink. All right, next is to pay attention. Now is the point where you have to start to pay attention. You've entered the bar, you've gotten through the sober stare, possibly you've ordered your drink, you've answered any questions. These are all the possible scenarios. And now you're just hanging out with your friends or your acquaintances or the work group or whoever it is. This is now the time to just, pay attention. Part of me wants to say be vigilant. I don't want you to have to stare everybody down and count people's drinks, but I feel like there's a gauge. I feel like 1 to 2 drinks. I don't even like using the word normal because alcohol's toxic. There's nothing really normal about putting alcohol in your body, but we do it and people do it and it's accepted in society. So I feel like 1 to 2 drinks, that's when the alcohol level's probably still fairly low, depending on the size of the person. It's going to vary from a tiny thin person to a very large overweight person. But 1 to 2 is usually when people are kind of status quo. 3 to 4 is when people start getting tipsy. And you'll start to see that shift. You'll start to see the looseness, that people start getting loose and a little bit freer and a little less inhibited, if you will. And then from 4 on is kind of like the shit show. I hate to say it that way, but that's when people start to get drunk. And again, with the little asterisk on the side, it is going to depend on the size of the person. A much larger person is going to have a much higher tolerance for alcohol. So I'm kind of stereotyping this gauge, but obviously the more people drink, the more drunk they're going to get. And you'll start to notice it. You'll start to notice the inhibitions lower, the volume goes up, the emotions get high, people get irrational, and then you possibly start to see them blacking out. So let's kind of jump to that. So getting drunk and blacking out are 2 different levels of the gauge. Blacking out does not mean passing out. That's a whole different thing. That's unconsciousness. Blacking out is when the body or the brain goes into a state of like a temporary amnesia, a temporary dementia. I believe it's the hippocampus in the brain that gets affected by the alcohol, and it reaches a level where it shuts it off, but you're still up and standing. You're still upright. You're still moving around, but the inhibitions just get much worse. I have been there, and there is nothing worse than waking up the next day and going, what did I do? Where have I been? Where am I? Who are you? Where's my car? All the questions you never want to have to ask. That is the blackout. And you will see that if you observe people. Even if you've had a few drinks and you're watching your friends and they've had more than you can identify. I think you can identify because I've seen it happen in several of my friends. It's kind of like the light switch goes off. You have the light switch that goes on and off, like the kind that you have on your wall to turn on the lamps. The light switch goes on and off, and that's the drunk. That's the flicks on, and you're like, oh, here we go. Then you have like that big power grid switch, like that big one you see in the movies where it's like a big one-handed or two-handed, like, they have to pull it down with all their might and it shuts everything down. That's the power switch that goes into blackout mode. And that's just seriously ugly. Nobody wants to witness that because that's when the inhibitions, they're not just off, they're gone. And I feel like that's the point where you can tell because your friends they're making such bad decisions that you can't even fathom that they would make such bad decisions. It's watching the friend of yours that's married have zero problem with going across the room and making out with whoever, the stranger or the person they know very well. Or I'm fine, I can drive, and getting into the fight and arguing about who's going to drive home. Let's go skinny dipping and jump off this bridge. I mean, those are usually things that are occurring. I'm not laughing because it's funny, but it's very sad. And that's just when the really bad decisions get made. And you don't want to be there. You do not want to be there when you're sober. It is horrible. It's a horrible thing to watch. It's horrible to watch people get drunk. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's uncomfortable. This is my personal opinion. And as I have talked to more and more people who have gone sober, they are like, ugh, it's the worst. And what I also think is that you have to go into a state of self-preservation as well. Because if you stay around for the drunk, or God forbid, the blackouts, it's very easy to become a target. It's very easy to become the target of the drunk people, whether it's, oh, you're Miss Goody Two Shoes, or I'm going to make all our jokes at your expense, or look at Mr. Miss Sober, and what's your problem? You think you're better than we are. Um, there's just a variety of different things that can happen, but you can become an easy target. And also, it's very easy to get resting bitch face when you're sitting around a table or around an environment of drunk people. Like, it has a shelf life, is the one, I think it's the best way I want to say it. It has an expiration date. That's why I said earlier about having an exit plan or an escape plan, because it does have an expiration date. You can be sitting around having a great conversation. You know, you guys are enjoying your wine or your beer or your spritzers or your cocktails or whatever, and we're all having a nice conversation. And then those switches start to go. And once those emotions and those volumes and the inhibitions start to shift, you see a side of people that you really don't tend to want to see. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, so and so was quite funny, but even the funny isn't as funny as it is when you're drunk. That's just my opinion. I think that when you see somebody who is quote unquote funny drunk, and let me just say, I've been all those people. I've been the funny drunk, the sad drunk, the sobbing drunk, the angry drunk. When you are in it, you don't see it. It's that whole, like, what's the phrase? You can't see the woods through the trees, or you can't see the trees through the woods, or something like that, where when you're in it, you don't see it. And so it's really important to take a step outside of it. And especially if you're sober curious. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but if you are sober curious, and I am not, let me side note this, I am not referring to somebody who is very, very deep into an extreme addiction. I don't mean the person who's rolling over and swigging out of a bottle of vodka every day and can't function to go to work at all. You don't need to try to go to the bar and be sober, because chances are you won't. You need to stay away from the bar, and you probably need to be in rehab. You do need to be in rehab if that's you, or in some sort of program. What I'm referring to is the type of person I was, which was a heavy binge drinker for 35 years. I did still drink during the week, but I was, it's an oxymoron now, and I think they're turning away from this phrase, but functional alcoholic. There's no such thing, but for this purpose, I'm going to use that phrase. I didn't lose my job or my relationships or anything like that. I was able to go through my day-to-day life. However, when you go to the bar as a sober person, you just get an entirely different perspective. And in some ways, it can help you realize why you need to quit drinking. Because what happens is you start to look at other people, especially if it's people you care about. Strangers is one thing. Strangers can act like assholes and it doesn't matter. But when you start seeing people that you care about, you're friends with, you love, your family, whoever, and they're drunk and you're not, you can get really turned off really fast. When you start looking at people and you're like, ugh, that's not attractive. That's not funny. That's not nice. That's a good cure for sobriety. At least I think it is. If you see people like that, ugh, it is not nice. So I do suggest, if you are like me and you were that binge drinker, and maybe you do have those nights where you have a drink or two and you're okay to do it. But on the weekend, or if there's an event, you tend to be the binge drinker. If there is an opportunity where you're like, okay, tonight I'm going to go out and I'm going to try really hard not to drink, and you can do it for a night, go do it. Check it out. See what happens. Just, was that in for a penny, in for a pound, as my husband says. When you're around the people, you get to that point where you're about to do your escape or your exit and you're watching all this go on. Just remember, you cannot speak logically. You can't reason with a drunk. They are not going to think logically. I think that's what I was trying to say. they're not going to think logically. So anything that you present is usually not going to be accepted, especially if it is logical. The driving drunk is a perfect example. I'm fine. I've only had 3. Well, chances are if you get pulled over, your blood alcohol is still higher, even though you think you're fine, whatever it is. So you can't reason with an addict or a drunk. So don't try to do it when they've reached that point. That has to be done in a state of sobriety. It's impossible. And I think that's where the resting bitch face comes in, because, as the night goes on, or the afternoon, or wherever it is you are, and everyone's drinking, and you shift from fun conversation either to loud screaming, falling over, arguing, that's just the point where you just need to tap out. You need to tap out, because you will start to show the look of I'm miserable. And that's, as I said earlier, that's when you can become a target. So, and then there's the aftermath. There is like the next day and how you move forward once you've done this and you've seen this. I feel like honesty is the best policy. I do feel like it's best to explain to people, I don't mind if you're going to go out in the afternoon for an hour, or if we want me to come over and hang out by the pool for a couple hours, but there is going to be a point where I'm going to leave. And this is also a good time to talk to people if you see them having a problem. The scenarios that I just painted for you are you're sober and everybody around you is completely hammered. That's obviously not going to be every scenario. I'm kind of using stereotypical extremes. Everybody else is really shit-faced and I'm sober. I'm the straight-laced person. That's not what I'm saying. You can go out and be like, okay, I'm fine. And then, 4 of the 10 of us are okay, because some of them are just, sipping on their rosé or on their Pinot Grigio or whatever. And then the others are deep in their scotch, arguing and fighting over politics or whatever. That's when you have to step back and be honest with the people that you're around. Like, I'm not going to do that anymore. It is not comfortable for me. I love you guys, but I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And when you do that, I think that's also a time to assess the responses that you get from your friends and your family. People who are truly close to you, what is that whole, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. I'm very lucky. I have a very good family. I'm very blessed with my family. So I'm not referring to my own, but there are just people who don't accept change. And a lot of times, especially with sobriety and addiction, if you are expressing that you've changed, it tends to open up people around you to think, oh, well, if they were doing this normally, like I heard a lot, you only drank normal. Well, if I drank normally and I quit because I said I had a problem, then maybe I need to, or if she did, I should say, then maybe I need to look at myself. But I don't want to look at myself because I think I'm fine. I hope that made sense. So it's again, let me make it an easier example. If I'm talking to somebody else about my sobriety, let's say it's my best friend, and my best friend and I drink the same. And my best friend says, well, why are you quitting? And I say, well, I had a problem. It was too much for me. I was sick all the time. I was hungover. I was missing days. I've made bad decisions. And they've done the exact same thing. That's when it can get a little bit touchy in your relationships, because then they start to look at themselves and go, well, if she thinks she has a problem, do I have a problem too? And sometimes people aren't willing to accept that at that time in their life. So you have to be prepared for that. But if you're criticized, that to me is toxic. It is not good for your sobriety. It is not good for your future. I think then that's the point where you can just, again, politely say, I can't surround myself with you if you're going to criticize what I'm doing. I'm doing what's best for me. I'm doing what's best for my mental and physical and spiritual health. And if you can't accept it, or if you're going to talk down to me about it or criticize or make fun of me, I have to step away from this relationship, whether temporarily or permanent. And I know that sounds harsh, but trying to, being sober is one thing, staying sober is another. So you have to set those boundaries. And it goes back to the bar. Setting the boundary of being in the bar or not being in the bar is something you have to do for yourself. I have decided, that I have to set my boundary for when I will and won't go to a bar event and how much time I will spend there, because I just don't enjoy being around drunk people, not in a big group, and not when I don't have an escape plan. I don't want to be stuck because, there's no enjoyment in being stuck like that. So that's where I'm going to stop today. I think I said all I'm going to say. Like I said, this is almost my little how-to, or maybe a tutorial, or I don't know. This was just mostly my personal observations, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And I'm not just referring to one instance. This was just several different things over the course of, a 6 to 8 month period. And it just was the same result every time. I just kind of felt icky when I left, and I don't want to feel icky anymore. I'm too old to feel icky. Nobody wants to feel icky. All right, my friends. Anyway, it's good to be back. I am so glad you guys are following. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to whatever format you're listening to. Go to www.notevenwinewithdinner.com, and you can check out my free sobriety starter kit, which is just a small little PDF of little kind of tips and tricks of some things you can do to get your mind shifting towards sobriety. Share it with your friends, and that's going to be it for this week. So I'll see you guys in a few. I'm out of here. Stay safe, stay sober. Bye-bye. Just a quick note of the legal jargon. I am not a medical or psychiatric professional, nor am I a recovery or addiction specialist. This podcast is for information use only, and I am simply sharing my own experiences with sobriety, drinking, mental health, and wellness. I'm not here to diagnose or to treat. So if you're struggling and you feel like you are in immediate need, please contact a medical professional or call 911. Thank you guys again. Stay safe, stay sober.